You know, when you spend 365 days breathing in sand and diesel fumes on a rig 3,000 miles from home, the only thing that keeps your heart beating is a picture in your head, a snapshot of silence, specifically the kind of silence you only get on a hilltop in Dust Creek, Nevada, where the wind sounds like it's whispering secrets to the sagebrush and the nearest neighbor is a coyote 2 valleys over. I survived the grueling shifts, the blistered hands, and the isolation by replaying that silence in my mind, promising myself that once I cashed that final check, I was going back to my 6 acres of heaven to disappear for a while. But when I finally turned my beat-up truck onto the gravel road that led to my property, the silence was dead, murdered by the sound of sprinkler systems and imported jazz music. I thought I was hallucinating, maybe the heat stroke finally catching up to me, because where my rusted barbed wire fence used to be, there was now a pristine, 10-foot privacy wall made of smooth cedar and stone, and behind it, rising like 3 pastel monsters against the desert sky, were mansions, Tuscan-style villas with terracotta roofs and balconies that looked down on the dirt like they were royalty. I slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding in the dust, and stared at a shiny brass plaque bolted to the gate that read, Vista Verde Estates, Private Residences, Members Only. For a solid minute, I just sat there, the engine idling, my brain trying to process the impossible geometry of it all, because I knew for a fact, I knew in my bones, that I hadn't sold a square inch of this land, I hadn't signed a deed, I hadn't even leased a parking spot, yet here were 3 luxury homes sitting on the soil my father left me. I got out, my boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud, and walked toward the gate, and that's when I saw them. People, actual people, sitting on a patio that was built directly over where my fire pit used to be, clinking wine glasses and laughing with the easy confidence of ownership. I didn't yell, I didn't scream, I just walked right up to the keypad, and before I could even touch it, the gate clicked open and a woman marched out, looking like she'd been 3D, printed from a catalog of suburban intimidation, wearing a beige power suit that probably cost more than my entire truck, holding a tablet like a shield. She stopped 3 feet from me, adjusted her designer sunglasses, and gave me a smile that was all teeth and 0 warmth, asking, "Can I help you, sir? Deliveries are around the back." I looked at her, then I looked at the house behind her, then back at her, and said, "Yeah, you can help me by explaining why you're standing in my living room," pointing to the patch of dirt where my cabin used to be, and why there are 3 houses on Lot 402. She didn't flinch, didn't even blink. She just tapped her screen and said, "I think you're confused. This is Vista Verde Estates, managed by the association, and this land was acquired under the Clark County Distressed Property Provision last year due to abandonment." And the way she said the word abandonment made it sound like a dirty word, like a sin. She introduced herself as Linda Vance, president of the HOA, and proceeded to lecture me about community standards and property values, explaining that since the owner, me, had vanished, the county allowed them to rehabilitate the area for the greater good. "I didn't vanish," I said, my voice shaking with a rage so cold it felt like ice in my veins. "I was working. I filed the non-occupancy permits. I paid the taxes. I did everything by the book." But Linda just sighed, the way a teacher sighs at a slow child, and told me that if I had a grievance, I could file a complaint on their website. But practically speaking, the development was done, the permits were signed, and I was trespassing on the land where I scattered my dad's ashes. I drove away because if I stayed, I would have done something that would put me in a cell, and I needed to be smart, not strong. I drove straight to the county records office, a place that smelled of stale coffee and bureaucratic despair, and demanded to see the file for Lot 402. The clerk, a tired kid named Benny, pulled it up on the screen and frowned, saying, "That's weird. We have 2 files." And when he clicked the second one, my stomach dropped through the floor. There it was, a digital document titled Notice of Intent to Forfeit, dated 9 months ago, and at the bottom, in black digital ink, was my signature, or at least, someone's attempt at my signature, a shaky, looped scrawl that looked nothing like the sharp, jagged way I signed my name. But that wasn't the kicker. That wasn't the thing that made the room spin. The kicker was the cosigner line, required for the transfer of the deed, where I saw the name Thomas Cole. "That's my father," I whispered, pointing at the screen, my finger leaving a smudge on the glass. Okay, Benny said, shrugging. Looks standard then. No, I said, looking him dead in the eye. It's not standard, because Thomas Cole died 4 years ago, so unless Vista Verde Estates has a direct line to the afterlife, that signature is a forgery. Benny stopped chewing his gum, his eyes went wide, and he started typing furiously, pulling up the metadata. And that's when the first domino fell. The notary stamp on the document belonged to a man named Mr. Henderson, who I happened to know had moved to a nursing home in Florida 2 years prior and couldn't hold a pen, let alone notarize a multi-million-dollar land transfer. I asked Benny to print everything, every single pixel, every timestamp, every log. And as the printer whirred, spitting out the evidence of the theft of my life, I realized this wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't a clerical error. This was a heist. I walked out of that office into the blinding Nevada sun, holding a stack of warm paper that proved Linda Vance and her little club of high society vultures hadn't just stolen my land. They had resurrected my dead father to do it. And that was the moment the sadness evaporated, replaced by a clarity so sharp it cut. They thought I was a ghost, a drifter who would never come back to check on a patch of dirt in the middle of nowhere. They thought they could pave over my history with marble driveways and forget I ever existed. But they forgot one thing: ghosts haunt people. I sat in my truck, watching the heat waves ripple off the asphalt, and dialed the number of the only lawyer I knew who terrified people for a living, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, who once sued a hurricane and won, and told her, "Sarah, I need you to meet me at the motel on Route 9 and bring the biggest lawsuit you can carry, because I'm about to go to war with the homeowners association." Sarah showed up 3 hours later, looking like she'd stepped out of a courtroom drama, took one look at the forged signature, and smiled a smile that was terrifyingly predatory, saying, "Forging a dead man's signature? That's not just fraud, Mason. That's a mistake that's going to buy you a retirement fund." But I told her I didn't want money. I wanted them gone. I wanted every brick demolished and every fence torn down. To do that, we needed more than just a forged signature. We needed to prove a conspiracy. We needed to prove they knew I was coming back and did it anyway. So Sarah made a call to an old contact of hers, a digital forensics guy named Marcus, a guy who lived in a basement in Reno and treated firewalls like suggestions. Marcus logged into the county's public server, and some parts that weren't so public, and within an hour, he found the digital footprint of the abandonment filing, tracing the upload IP address not to a government office, but directly to the Wi-Fi network of the Vista Verde sales office. But the smoking gun, the thing that would turn this from a civil dispute into a criminal nightmare for them, was a deleted email Marcus recovered from the server of a man named Councilman Holloway, the zoning official who approved the project in record time. The email was from Linda Vance, dated 3 weeks before the permits were issued, and it had one line: "Proceed with the build on Lot 402. Assume he won't return. If he does, we'll bury him in paper." I stared at that sentence, "assume he won't return," and felt a strange calm settle over me. The kind of calm you feel before you pull the trigger, because now I knew this wasn't just business, it was personal, and I wasn't going to bury them in paper. I was going to bury them in the truth. We spent the next 48 hours turning my motel room into a war room. Maps taped to the peeling wallpaper, timelines drawn in red marker, coffee cups stacking up like towers, with Sarah handling the legal strategy, Marcus mining the digital depths, and me acting as the anchor, the man who knew every inch of the land they were trying to steal. We brought in a third player, an ex-cop named Detective Reynolds, a woman who could spot a liar from a satellite photo, and sent her to interview the construction crews who built the mansions. Reynolds came back with gold. She found a foreman who admitted, off the record, that they broke ground 2 months before the permits were even issued, paid in cash by a shell company registered to Linda Vance's husband, a detail that proved premeditation. We had the forgery, the IP logs, the email, and the witness, but Sarah said it wasn't enough to just sue them. We had to trap them. We had to get them to lie on the record, under oath, before we dropped the hammer. So she arranged a mediation hearing, a polite little sit-down where they would think they were buying me off. The meeting was held in a glass-walled conference room in downtown Las Vegas, the kind of place designed to make regular people feel small, and Linda walked in like she owned the building, flanked by a lawyer who looked like he cost $500 a minute and a sidekick named Dr. Eris, the board treasurer who looked nervous enough to vomit. I sat opposite them, wearing my work boots and a flannel shirt, looking tired, looking defeated, because that's what they wanted to see. They wanted a broken man looking for a payout. Mr. Cole, Linda started, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. We understand this is emotional for you, but the community is established now. Families live there. We can't just tear it down. So we're prepared to offer you a fair market value for the raw land, plus 10% for your trouble. I looked at the check she slid across the table, a number that would have been tempting if I didn't have a soul, and I looked up at her and asked, quietly, "The paperwork, the transfer. You guys handled all that? You got my dad's signature?" Linda nodded, confident. Yes, our notary, a very reputable service, handled the remote signing. Everything was done according to the transitional statutes. We were very thorough. Sarah, sitting next to me, tapped her pen on her legal pad, a signal, and asked, "And this notary, Mr. Henderson, he personally witnessed the signing?" "Absolutely," Linda's lawyer interjected. "We have the affidavit." "Great," Sarah said, and she reached into her bag and pulled out a single piece of paper, placing it gently on the table. "Because this is Mr. Henderson's death certificate. He died 3 days ago, but more importantly, this is his medical record from 2 years ago showing he was in a coma during the time you claim he notarized the deed." The room went so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming. The blood drained from Linda's face so fast she looked like a wax statue, and Dr. Aris made a sound like a squeak. "And," I added, leaning forward, dropping the tired worker act, "since my father has been dead for 4 years, I'm really curious how you got them both in the same room to sign a document that was uploaded from your personal Wi-Fi network." Linda's lawyer scrambled, trying to gather papers, stammering about clerical errors and third-party contractors. But Sarah wasn't done. She played the audio recording Marcus had recovered, the voicemail Linda left for Councilman Holloway where she explicitly said, "Just backdate the permits. Nobody looks at the timestamps on the archive server." "This isn't a negotiation anymore," I said, standing up, my hands flat on the table, staring right into Linda's terrified eyes. "This is a crime scene, and you're not the landlords. You're the suspects." We walked out of that room, leaving them in a pile of their own lies, and I felt the momentum shift, like a giant while turning in the mud, finally catching traction. But Linda wasn't going down without a fight. 2 days later, I got a cease and desist order claiming I was harassing the residents, and a private security cruiser started parking at the end of my road, flashing its lights all night, trying to intimidate me. They thought that would scare me? I lived in a shipping container in the desert for a year. A rent-a-cop with a flashlight was nothing. I called Marcus and told him to go deeper, to find the money, because people like Linda don't just steal land for the view, they steal it for the profit. Marcus followed the money trail from the Vista Verde accounts and found that the rent from the 3 mansions wasn't going to the HOA general fund. It was being funneled into a holding company in the Caymans called LV Holdings, which, surprise, surprise, listed Linda Vance and Councilman Holloway as the primary beneficiaries. This was racketeering. We took everything to the district attorney, a guy who was up for re-election and hated Councilman Holloway, and he looked at our binder of evidence, the forgery, the cyberstalking, the money laundering, the fake permits, and his eyes lit up like it was Christmas morning. "This is actionable," he said. "But we need to do this in open court. We need to get a judge to annul the deed before we can arrest anyone. Otherwise, it's just a property dispute." So we filed the motion, an emergency hearing to vacate the title based on fraud, and the date was set. The night before the hearing, I drove out to the ridge overlooking the valley, staring down at the glowing windows of the mansions built on my memories. I could see the families inside, eating dinner, watching TV, completely unaware that they were living in a crime scene. I didn't hate them, they were pawns, but I hated the arrogance that put them there. I lit a cigarette, the smoke curling up into the star-filled sky, and whispered to the ghost of my father, "Don't worry, Pop. I'm getting the land back, and I'm keeping the souvenir." The courtroom was packed, buzzing with that specific frequency of tension you only get when rich people are about to lose something. And Linda Vance sat at the defense table, looking less like a queen and more like a cornered animal, her perfect hair slightly frizzy, her suit a shade too dark. Judge Harper was an older woman, sharp as a tack, who read through our filing in silence for 20 minutes while the whole room held its breath. When she finally looked up, she didn't look at the lawyers. She looked straight at Linda. "Ms. Vance," she said, her voice echoing off the mahogany walls. "I have seen sloppy paperwork in my time. I have seen negligence, but I have rarely seen a level of orchestrated deceit that involves notarizing the signature of a deceased man." Linda's lawyer tried to stand up, tried to object, but the judge cut him off with a gavel strike that sounded like a gunshot. "Sit down, counsel." The evidence presented by the plaintiff regarding the digital timestamps and the IP logs is irrefutable. Sarah stood up then, delivering the final blow. "Your Honor, we not only ask for the immediate restoration of the title to Mr. Cole, but we ask that the structures on the property, having been built illegally and without the owner's consent, be forfeited to the landowner as per the fixtures and improvements doctrine of Nevada property law." The courtroom gasped. I watched Linda's eyes go wide. She thought I was going to ask for them to be torn down. She never imagined I'd claim them. "Granted," Judge Harper said, and the word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. "The deed is voided. The land and all improvements thereon belong to Mr. Cole. Furthermore, I am forwarding the transcripts of this hearing and all evidence to the State Attorney General's office with a recommendation for criminal charges regarding the forgery and wire fraud." The moment the gavel hit, the doors at the back of the room opened and 2 deputies stepped in. They didn't come for me. They walked right past the gallery, right up to the defense table, and asked Linda Vance to stand up and place her hands behind her back. Watching the handcuffs click onto the wrists of the woman who laughed at me through a gate, the woman who told me I didn't belong on my own land, wasn't a moment of joy. It was a moment of heavy, profound relief, like dropping a 100-pound pack after a long hike. She looked at me one last time as they let her out, her face crumbling, and I just tipped my imaginary hat. The aftermath was swift and brutal for them. Vista Verde Estates dissolved within a month. Councilman Holloway resigned in disgrace before he was indicted. Dr. Aris flipped on everyone to save his own skin. As for the houses, I didn't tear them down. That would be a waste of good materials, and frankly, I liked the irony too much. I kept them. I moved into the main cabin I eventually rebuilt on the ridge, exactly the way my dad had it. But I took the 3 mansions, stripped them of their tacky gold fixtures, and turned them into rental properties. I called the big one the Linda Suite. Now, every month, the rent checks from those mansions hit my bank account, paying for my retirement, paying for the upkeep of the land, and ensuring that no one will ever be able to buy me out. I sat on my porch last week, watching the sun dip below the canyon, listening to the absolute silence of the desert, a silence that I own, a silence that pays me. It's funny how the world works. They tried to steal my history to build their future, and instead, they just built me a retirement plan. The sign at the front gate now reads, "Private property of Mason Cole. Trespassers will be politely reminded that I own a backhoe." But here's the thing that keeps me up at night, the question I want to throw out to you guys. I took the houses. Legally, they're mine. Morally, some people say I should have sold them and given the money to the families who got scammed by the HOA, even though they were trespassing. Others say those families were part of the problem, ignoring the red flags because they wanted a cheap luxury home. So, did I do the right thing by keeping the spoils of war? Is it justice to profit from the corruption of your enemies? Or is that just another form of greed? Let me know in the comments, because out here in the quiet, the line between right and wrong can get a little blurry in the heat. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm going to go check the mail. I think the rent is due.